Welcome. We have Gio and I are here with James Rankin, who is the head of research and insight at the Instant Group and also a very in-demand speaker at the industry conferences. So we're very much looking forward to getting you all to ourselves today to kind of poke around at what you're working on and what you're focused on right now. So I know it's at least late afternoon for you in London. So thanks for making the time to do this, James.
No problem at all. Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Thanks, Gio, for having me. And I don't know about in demand. I think I will force myself on people in those conferences. But yeah, the feedback's been not so bad. So there we go. So far.
No, exactly. Well, the industry is just constantly evolving, and the folks with the data and the numbers are, the popular folks in the room. So, and you're pretty likable. Well, tell us a little bit about. I don't know much about you and your background. Give us a little what's the James Rankin story?
Yeah. So I started out in working for a German market research company, which you can imagine was a particularly fun place to be, coming straight out of university.
Scintillating is the word that comes to mind.
There
Yes.
we go. Yeah. And no, I mean, I've followed a fairly convoluted path, working through different industries in both the B2B world, but also the B2C, everything from tech through to fast fashion, but always focusing on sort of the use of data and trying to inform those industries. And yeah, 5 years ago, ended up here at the Instant Group, in the world of flexible workspace and co-working, which I mean, at that time, was seeing a huge amount of growth. But I think over just those short 5 periods that I've been involved, we've seen not only sort of the COVID and the pandemic impact things, but just the market really start to evolve and mature, which has been a fantastic, experience and place to be.
Yeah, and what I love about you, James, is not only it's not only you saying what you believe, it's scientifically based, right? I think that's one of the beauties of it is, and we'll jump a whole lot into this over the next 45 minutes or so, is just the data, right? There's just not a whole lot of data out there, but everything that you say is the reports that you put, the research you do, and just recently. Y'all released your annual Flex report. Can you give us kind of a quick summary of kind of what exactly is entailed into that report and kind of what's put in and what comes out?
Yeah, I mean, I was super lucky that when I joined this business, we had a wealth of information and data that we sat on. And that was just sort of the exhaust of the brokerage platform that exists within the Instant Group, which is called Instant Offices. So I've been in a really fortunate position that we have had such a fantastic data set that's allowed me to go out and talk about these things. So talk about the trends, talk about what we're seeing, and as you say, Joe, base that on fact and out on data, which everyone has an opinion, and rightly so, but sometimes it's good to just sort of, I guess, ground ourselves with something that we can say this is factually happening, and that for me is always a great starting point. I mean, in terms of what we're seeing in terms of those sort of, we talked, a number of reports have gone out, but specifically the last one I think was the predictions that we have coming out for this year. I mean, for us, it's all about sort of the growth and the evolution of the industry. So when we're talking to the occupier side, the volume of demand and interest that we're seeing for flexible workspace just grows every single year. And what we've seen, people have said it before, but what we've seen through the pandemic is just some of those embers that were starting to burn have really caught flame. And companies, businesses, large and small, are really seeing that they have to adapt and evolve their workspace strategy, and Flex is an absolutely core part of that. So I think going forward that's a big thing for us. And then in those predictions, we're also looking at, well, how does the industry as we know it today supply that demand? And I think that's a really interesting topic. There's potentially a lot of challenge there, frankly, if we don't see big change and big investment coming in from outside sources that we traditionally wouldn't associate with the flex or co-working sector.
Say more about
Yeah,
that.
and a lot of that is survey based, right? Or how are you collecting that data?
Yeah, so we have from the hard market stats and data we have, as I say, a lot of that comes from the exhaust of our brokerage business. So that gives us, amazing data on the transactional activity and demand that we see. But as you say, we were also running primary research studies. So a big part of my job and my role is to ultimately keep a pulse of what both the occupiers and the industry is thinking and saying. And for us, it's always about trying to look forward, not backwards. So that transactional data gives us a fantastic view of what's happened up to a point today. But what's really valuable is combining that with, well, what's going to happen next. And the best way of doing that is just going out to the market and asking. So we're continuously running, surveys with that occupier community, with those people looking for space. What are they looking for? What's in demand right now? And at the same time asking those same questions to the industry, because for me the really interesting nuggets come from, well, when there's a mismatch between those two elements. And I think that's what we're seeing at a broader real estate level right now, is that mismatch between supply and demand coming to a head.
Wait, I want to hear about the mismatch. Yeah, say more about that.
Well, I mean, if we look at sort of and I'll come close to home and look at the UK here. If we look at the occupancy rates within the flexible market, they're in the 80s, in the high 80s in a lot of cases. Yeah, I mean, it's not everyone, but broadly speaking, what we hear is this is the best market that we've seen from providers of space, and that's simply because the occupiers, the demand is there, and people are buying. At the same time, if we look at the volumes of new flexible space coming to the market, it's at some of the lowest levels that we've sort of ever seen. So going, pre-pandemic, broadly speaking, you could say sort of 10 to 12% of all sort of new supply coming to the market was being snapped up by Flex or being provided by Flex. Today, those figures are sort of between 2 and 4%. So
why is that? Is that
it's a number of factors, but I think it's concern from an investment perspective. Everyone is concerned about investing in commercial real estate right now.
Period.
And office space is a scary word for the investment community, understandably so. And this comes back to data, but unless you've got the data to prove or disprove those fears, then no one's going to make those decisions, and no one's going to make those investments. And we do need investment. As an industry, what people are looking for now is larger scale. It's slightly more mature than some of what we saw 5-10 years ago from co-working, and it needs more money to get it up and running. And therefore, that means landlords, external investors, need to get involved to provide that. And unless the data's there, it's very hard for those people to make those decisions.
So the demand's there, access to capital challenging right now, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. But Gio, go ahead.
I was going to say, and a lot of this is, I mean, I'm literally staring at your report. You can't see it because I don't have the background as we're having this conversation. But I mean, we'll put a link to that latest report in there. But you actually have flex occupancy rates based off of continent on here that breaks it down into 0 to 60, 61 to 80, 81 to 100. So definitely include a link to this report that you can kind of dive deeper and see it's got great visuals that you can kind of look at. I mean, I just circulated around our AY offices this morning, and it's such a great way to look at data from a visual and even written standpoint.
Hats off to our marketing team there. I can't take much credit for those visuals.
Making it look beautiful. Yeah, I mean, very quick sidebar. I always point to Instant in terms of being a tremendous resource of this, like, just great, like, market by market, but like global views and then deeper market views. If you're ever looking for data, head to the Instant site. I think probably under their research tab, and you'll find some great stuff.
Instant insight on the website. Yeah.
Instant insight.
Have a look. Okay, reach out for sure. We're always happy to help. I mean, we see the industry as a sort of a $26 billion industry right now. What's that? Of a $2 to $3 trillion industry. So we're we're a minnow when we're talking about flexible workspace, and there's so much pent up potential there. So I think, you know, for us, it's all about how do we enable that growth, and data is and insight is certainly one of those avenues.
Well, you say that, but also I say you got more in my opinion. I don't know, Jamie, chime in on this, but in my opinion, Instant Group has more data than anyone else globally on the industry, right?
I was going to say it, but I didn't know which of our listeners I might offend. But
that's all right. I
was going to ask James to sort of validate or verify that, because you have the transaction data, and I suspect that volume might be the highest in the industry. And then you have, you know, a market research group, and so you're layering both of those things as you pointed out. So, yep.
And you can't forget their partnerships. I've got air quotes if you're listening, with IWG and what's the latest with what is it, James? CoworkIntel?
CoworkIntel, yeah. So that's a standalone business data platform. Those guys have been going for about 3 years, and for us, that's the next evolution of data. So, you know, my job is to try and make data accessible, and make sure that those who are using it can get the insight out, in whatever format they want. CoworkIntel is a self-serve platform. So you as individuals, you know, get in there, access that information how you want, and pull it out. I think for me, that's the next evolution of a sort of data use. It's something we've seen across many other industries, and it's what sort of the larger, more traditional analysts are much more used to. So again, it's how do we make this data accessible to the communities that we need to get investment from as an industry, alongside making it as easy to use for operators. That's what those guys do, and they've been doing a fantastic job.
So what do you how will that play a role? So you talked about sort of the gap in terms of the capital markets aren't supporting the growth in supply. Part of it is, right, the office, you know, commercial office is a, you know, bad word. Flex is like a separate asset class, you know, some folks will refer to it as, but there's no like great data source for folks to make those decisions. So yeah, what does that look like over the next few years? Is that gap closable?
Yeah,
what are your thoughts?
I mean, I think it is closable. It's something that's been solved in, as I say, many other industries, both sort of B2B and B2C. So it's a well-known sort of route. It's just, I think the evolution of the flexible workspace industry has always been at a point where it's not been a priority. We haven't needed that level of clarity and investment. But as I say, from my perspective, we're sort of reaching that tipping point where we do, if we want the industry to significantly move forward and grow to the potential that certainly we think it can do. And I reference, you know, the work that I'm doing, but you know, the amount of landlords and serious investment houses that we're having discussions with and supporting through the use of data has dramatically increased since the 5 years, you know, when I joined the Instant Group. And I think that's just testament to the interest that's coming in from that community, but also the need for them to have reliable information that they can build into their models, or they can at least use to help sort of develop their strategy. And for a lot of those providers, it is still at that strategic level. So what do we want to be doing and how do we doing it? I mean, Gio, you must be having a number of those conversations yourself from the AY angle, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much going on right now, and things are moving so fast, right? And back to the point is the science meets art side of it, right? Is the art is a lot of our opinions. The science is where we're lacking data, right? And the lack of transparency. It's so interesting because everyone thinks that they have some kind of special sauce, right? And so I'm sure Jamie goes through this too. As we work with people, they're like, well, we need you to sign an NDA. And I'm like, I promise you there is nothing that you're going to show me about your business that I haven't seen multiple times over. And I think that's where your reports and your data and your partnerships are going to go along. Is there one place to go to right now, see all that is going on in the industry, right? You've got to go out and secret shop, or you've got to, call your friend or do all kinds of stuff. When in reality, you look at the hotel industry, you look at the office industry overall, and you can find out what RevPow is in the hotel industry for all hotels, right? You can go to CoStar and get overall comps and everything else. You can do that with MLS for residential here in the US. And so we just don't have that, right? And so it's so interesting just to see the transparency that we have. I mean, hell, there's no surprise to you when the whole IWG thing came out. It was like Jamie and I were dealing with people calling us being like, oh my gosh, can you believe it? I mean, how are we going to still do business with Instant Group? And it's like, guys, there's nothing, that's being done that's deceiving or anything else. It's just a form of continuing to aggregate data.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a good point, which is people are concerned about sort of the use of data. But actually, if people take a look and a step back and go, well, we've been using that data all along. We've just been getting it through a really inefficient method. So, going out doing mystery shopping, is that a good use of anyone's time, really? I would say not. And not only that, but you only get visibility of what you see on that one day. And who knows if that's, let's say, from an occupancy perspective, if that's the day there's a huge function that's going on in that building, and therefore it's heaving. Or actually, is it just a Friday and it's dead quiet, but it's not like that for the rest of the week? So, I think the methods that people have used, they felt comfortable with. But from my perspective, the same end point has been trying to be reached. It's just through a more inefficient process. And what we're trying to do and what CoworkIntel are trying to do through the aggregation of data is go, look, we can give you that information in an anonymized and aggregated way. So it's still super confidential. You're not being exposed, but you can get it at a click of a button and what you're looking at. You can trust that, rather than sending yourself or a team member out every couple of weeks to understand what a competitor's doing down the road, or calling up a brokerage firm and having to put in a mystery, a fake request to see what pricing's being offered. At the moment, it's from my perspective, a sort of an antiquated, just such an old-fashioned way of,
right. I mean, the hotels don't do that, right? No, the hotels aren't sending their front desk staff like down the street to check and see what the Westin's doing.
You know what they are doing? They're focusing on their customers, right? They're giving it good
hospitality,
service,
the experience,
which is what you're paying them for.
Yeah,
and here's the reality too: is, I mean, at some point you question the ethics behind that too, right? And I'll tell you, I used to secret shop when I was at Regis, and it got to the point very quickly where, especially with a name like mine, and luckily with the brand I built, is all you have to do is put my name into LinkedIn, which is what a lot of these community managers and stuff do to figure out, okay, what's the viability of this?
That's what I train them to do, Gio.
It's very easy to figure out who I am, and then now I'm a liar, right? So I've lost my overall not just in integrity as a whole, right? And so I challenge people to be like, look, walk in and tell people who you are and share information with them at the same time as they're giving you information. And so I think that's a big part that we're missing in this industry, which I think is part of what Juicy and GWA and some of these things we're trying to create. Is the goal is to bring people together, build relationships. I know Lexi does that with their partnerships, and there's other alliances like that where it's like, guys, I mean, we're all in this together. Everyone's offering a different product type, different service offerings. And so how can we better come together collectively and make the industry better?
And to the point, I made earlier about the size of the industry today, depending what numbers you take, it can vary. But I think everyone can agree that we are a minnow still. We're a fraction of the traditional market. But where we should be getting to is, 10, 15, 20% of that. And if we get there, then everyone's business has grown, tenfold. There shouldn't be this to the level of concern about sort of competitiveness when we're still so relatively, we've got so much growth to go.
So James, you're not buying the Scott Homa 30% number?
What, 30% of the flex? I mean, well, interestingly enough, at the GWI, I chatted to Scott about that. And you know what? Actually, I think that's not a bad number. Look, who knows where the industry will get to? It's a very hard figure to put a stake in the ground. And to be fair to Scott, he did that. So, and I think everyone sort of adopted it, which is fantastic. I mean, what I think the more important question is, what is that 30% made up of? So,
100%.
Is it what we know of flex and co-working today? Probably not. Well, some of it will be, for sure. Maybe 10%, maybe 15, who knows? But, from our perspective, it's much more about what that number's made up of and what those products are and how that fulfills demand. Sorry. Lights are going off in the office today. Clearly, I'm past bedtime. I need to move around more.
You're right. They're like, no one's here.
Yeah.
Your motion sensors. So I think most folks think that 30% will come from landlord inventory. And your report has a whole section on landlords and flex. And there's a subhead here that says half of landlords surveyed said they expect 16 to 25% of their portfolios to be flexible by 2025, which feels really fast. Do you think is that real? Will that happen?
I think that's the ambition. Yeah. I mean, those figures are coming from the conversations we're having with large landlords with huge portfolios. So alongside some of the smaller ones, with just one asset. So yeah, I mean, I think that is the ambition. To get there, and we're having these conversations and supporting these sort of individuals on those journeys, is going to be a challenge because, again, it comes back to investment. At a centralized, if we take a large landlord, at a centralized function, that can be their ambition. But they've got to then sell that into each asset management team. And it's almost, it can be on a building by building basis or asset by asset basis. So it's not a simple journey. But what I think we will see, and this is just my personal opinion, is as the traditional market becomes a far tougher place to be, and we're starting to see, rumors of that with devaluations, etc., coming out, then that interest in other solutions, flexible workspace being one of them, which we know as industry and people working inside the industry really can add value and generate more revenue per sort of square footage. That's when those solutions become more interesting, and those, I wouldn't say skeptics, but people that haven't had to look down that route before become far more interested, and it really snowballs. So I think it's possible, but it's certainly the ambition. But it's not going to be, a straight road to get there.
Yeah, and I think to clarify, James, and obviously it's your report, so clarify this for us. But when it says flexible, that isn't just co-working, right? That is everything from spec suites to town halls to anything that is. I mean, what's the definition of flexible as it's used for this report or your data?
Yeah. So then this comes back to the 30% and what is it made up of? Is it going to be co-working, which we might sort of know today? No, I don't think it's just going to be that. I think it's going to be much more sort of larger spaces provided for potentially corporates, potentially SMEs that are looking for what we would term flexible solutions. So that's sort of fully inclusive services or spaces that deliver, FM, deliver service lines, deliver internet. It alongside potentially some of their own branding as well. So I think, what we're seeing today is the evolution of what does flexible mean. And I think there's quite a long way for that to go. But in terms of those figures, it's going to be a combination of the co-working we know and love today and some sort of gray area that will form in between traditional and what we have currently. That's my opinion. I mean, I don't know, Jamie, Gio, what your
Yeah, no, I think that was the point Gio was probably getting to, was more turnkey, shorter term, is more flexible than what's out there now. So more occupier friendly in terms of what they're looking for, not necessarily that inventory is going to be highly serviced, $200 a foot, build out. Gio, yeah. What do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just the reality. I mean, honestly, I think if we were to do a survey today on how much flex space there is out there from a spec suites through anything flexible, I think you'd be pretty surprised what that number is at, because spec suites were already growing pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
And I think now more than ever, you mean you've got Bridge, Hines, Naveen just announced, Industrious just put out their big announcement with Industrious, Brookfield. You've got these big names that are looking at major portfolios that are doing it. And then, everything from the KBSs and kind of KBS still isn't on the medium size. They're still a pretty large REIT, but I mean, there's plenty of these groups that are already doing it. I think what we're going to see the most growth on is how many of these landlords are realizing, hey, you know what, whether we like it or not, we're in partnership with these operators. So we might as well do management or hybrid deals, right? I think that's where we're going to see the most amount of growth. And so I think it'll be really interesting. I mean, I love this landlord and flex slide because, I mean, if you go back to my quote when Mark Gilbreth asked the postcard of the future, that's what it was. I think this year is when landlords are going to realize that they've missed the bus, if you will, and they need to catch up pretty fast because their competition is ahead of them, without a doubt.
I think you say competition, and there is certainly an element to that, but I think it's also about understanding what the different customer segments are, and what one small co-working provider or multi-location co-working provider's customer is versus what some of these landlords will be going after will be very different. And again, it's just about understanding who the customer is and providing the right product and service to tap into that demand. Without that, we're not going to again get to the growth that we should.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And I mean, I think kind of leads to, who's using that, right? And I mean, I love the slide that you guys have on utilization, right? Because it starts really breaking down is who's using the flex space, right? There's all this talk about enterprise and everything else. And I mean, I think there's been operators that, at times have said the future is enterprise. And then there's people that quickly argue, well, I mean, a major part of flex has always been entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and things like that. So, I mean, I think that's going to be the really interesting part for me, is how that balances out. I mean, we're already seeing a bunch of these enterprises demanding people come back into the office. But the reality is, I mean, to what extent are they going to be able to do that with the upper tier of their employees, right? I mean, I think you're certainly going to be able to do it with the lower third. The middle third, middle managers and stuff like that, I still think need to continue to be in the office to do mentoring to get stuff done. But I mean, a lot of the talent out there is going to dictate, how they want to work, right? If you're a top producer at some of these companies, you're going to get to pick and choose what that looks like, right?
I mean, I think there's a lot to sort of unpick around sort of current strategy and future strategy for a lot of occupiers. I mean, on one hand, you're right, you're seeing all this sort of return to work mandate going on. A couple of large companies just the last couple of weeks have sort of set out their 3 or 4 day in the office policies. But at the same time, again, when we're doing surveys and speaking to senior people in real estate teams within the occupier community, they're telling us that, well, their real estate portfolio today is nowhere near aligned to their existing strategy or optimum. In fact, I think it was just 10% said that today's portfolio aligned completely with their demand. So on one hand, you're hearing, we need to get people back in for various different reasons, but at the same time, the businesses themselves are planning for a different future. They're looking for flexibility and agility because they know that things will continue to change, and without that, you can't react. I mean, that's ultimately the biggest challenge. Is businesses haven't been able to react to changing demand because of their traditional sort of portfolios. And again, the data we have is fantastic to back that stuff up, but that's what we're seeing. Apologies, guys, for the lack of light here. I could stand up and walk around and try and get it to come back on, but I'll just sit here in the dark instead.
No, you kind of look like Batman.
We've got from behind.
Gotham in the background.
Totally. Yeah,
Right, Bruce
exactly.
Wayne.
Yep.
So what do you think the headwinds are kind of pushing forward for the flex community as a whole? I mean, that's operators, landlords, occupiers, just in general.
I mean, for me, and I am really positive about this. That I think there's a huge amount of opportunity in the next sort of 3 to 5 years. I think if we can get it right as a community and as an industry, then demand will just flood through the doors. The key, I think, is about understanding or identifying what those customers are, who you want to attract, and then producing the right product that aligns to that. And you can use data, you can use support, consultancy services. You guys do this all the time to help get there. And then it's about understanding, once you've got that space, or as you're building that space up, well, how do I maximize my revenue? So am I pricing in the right way? Am I even building it out to meet current demand in terms of sort of the different sort of segmentation within that building? How hard should I be pushing on a contract based on the surrounding market dynamics and current occupancy levels? So for me, the opportunity is huge, but I think we as an industry just need to get a little bit smarter in terms of how do we make the decisions that we make ultimately when it comes to things like pricing, when it comes to things like expansion, and when it comes to things like partnerships. That's my take on it.
Yeah, Jay, what else you got? You were all prepared. You had an itinerary. You broke our rules today. You were freaking out. What do we not covered on your checklist?
I'm curious, James, from your perspective. If you look ahead 5 years, what does the shift look like sort of globally? Like the UK has been, so far ahead in terms of flex supply and percentage that flex makes up of overall commercial office space. Where do you think we'll see, sort of some shifts globally over the next?
Yeah, I mean, I think as you say, the UK has sort of traditionally led from that, just for the percentage of space versus sort of the rest of the market. But I think, and we were seeing this pre-pandemic, and we're certainly seeing it now, which is a bit of a rebalance from that perspective, with huge amounts of interest and growth from the US, not just in major markets, but in sort of more suburban type locations. I think the sort of the repurposing of non-traditional assets into office space is something that we're going to see particularly spring out of the US. We already are. Throughout Europe, again, supply has been very much concentrated around the big cities. And if the trends continue, which I certainly think they will do, then we will see that sort of proliferation out into secondary markets in a big way. And there's an education piece there as well, in terms of what is flex, because a lot of these markets have been woefully undersupplied from a quality perspective, at least. Mm-hmm. And some people's expectation is not in line with reality. Reality is really good quality product, really good quality service, and at actually very affordable prices if you're looking around and understanding what you're getting and using it in the right way is the other factor. So I think that's where I think we can see a lot of sort of growth come from. There's no reason why, if we look at the UK, we say sort of the penetration of flex is 6 to 7% of the total market, maybe getting up to 8 these days. Why the US shouldn't be the same in sort of 5 to 6 years? Why we wouldn't see that throughout parts of Asia and Europe as well? It's as I say, demand's there. We just now need to fulfill that from a supply perspective. Maybe I'm too optimistic. I don't know, but it's not often you get a Brit being super optimistic. So,
right, we should take that as a sign. James, how many days a week do you go into the office?
I'm in 2 to 3 days. So if you can see from the background, we've got a fantastic office in Southwark in London. It was relatively new, and I think what I find coming here is a sense of excitement, meeting people, having discussions that you just can't foster virtually. They're not scheduled. That's the point. It's that informality. And actually, the team here have done a fantastic job in creating a space people want to be in. So we have instances now on Tuesdays, in particular Tuesdays and Wednesdays, where if you haven't booked a desk, you're not sitting down.
Wow,
So,
nice.
yeah. So I mean that's just the situation, and that's every week now. So yeah, I don't know. Do you guys are you guys spending much time? I guess Jamie, you're probably traveling around in different locations. Same for you, Gio.
Gio's always on the road. I am definitely less
Yeah.
on the road. Yeah, Gio, where are you working from today?
I'm in Instant Group's
You're an
office.
instant. I was going to say, I recognize
rethinking workspaces. It's
that,
behind
that's
me.
our old office. Yeah.
So no, I'm in Dallas, but I'm waiting. If y'all haven't seen the weather, this is gonna throw us off when the podcast comes out. But it is icy and cold outside. So I've actually got a flight today to the Carolinas. I've got meetings there the next 3 days, but I keep looking to see if they've canceled yet, because they've canceled more than 50% of flights. But
yeah,
James, I spent 120 days on the road last year, so it's awesome to be able to get out and see different products, have different conversations. And it's so interesting, just even using the US, depending on where I am in the country, a lot of these conversations vary, right? I mean, if you're on the West Coast, the San Francisco, Seattle, Portland, up north, Minneapolis, a lot of those are really, really struggling. But then you get into, Denver, certainly most of Texas, Nashville, everything's, going really well. I mean, those are basically cities where it's a work-life balance is more along that. I mean, the political system is a little less invasive, if you will, on kind of regulations that they've had to adhere to or come out of. And then, kind of the Northeast is interesting. I mean, last week I was in DC and New York, and it's just, the suburbs of DC are doing well, but the urban core is really being affected by a lot of that. I mean, even while I was there, the mayor of DC came out and was begging the government to bring people back in. And then New York, right? Gosh. New York is New York. Never bet against it, but the people that are living in New York are no longer the people that were in New York before, right? I think a lot of those people were living and officing in the suburbs and realized, you know what, I don't need to go in 5 days a week. I mean, his census, who I work with very closely, they actually office in the Tishman Spire building now in Tishman studio space, and they go into the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right? So Monday and Friday have a little more flexibility. But again, it's just one of those things where if as an employer, right, as I step back and look at that, if I put that hat on, I'm going, if people are commuting in an hour, 2 hours each way, that's 2 to 4 hours of time they could be working from home or being more productive in other ways.
Exactly. I mean, I think that the survey that we're running at the moment, so that the results may change, but at the moment we're asking, how do you get, what are you doing to get utilization up in your office buildings? And the number one is mandate from an HR perspective. Number two is have locations that are closer to home. And I think people have been saying it for years, but it can be that simple. I mean, one of the things, it comes down to utilization, but one of the things I found really interesting, and we've been talking about it Instant for probably a year and a half now, but it's the comparison around, well, what was good? What did good look like before? If we're comparing office usage to pre-pandemic, which inevitably is what we're doing and what people are doing, you have to have an understanding of what that is. And actually, a lot of companies don't. They're going, well, I had 100%. You never had 100%. At best, it was 70, probably. it's probably closer to 60. And therefore, if you're getting now people in your occupancies or utilizations at maybe 30%, well, rather than that being 30% compared to 100, it's 30 compared to 60. So it's only half what it used to be, but it seems so much worse. And I think companies are just starting to realize that, or at least factor that in to some of these sort of policies and strategies.
Yeah, the reference point is really important. It's such a great point.
Yeah. So how do you see, the whole technology side? Obviously, there's several facets behind that, but obviously during the pandemic, we saw the whole Zoom, Teams, etc., just take off. I mean, and I think a big part of that is, we've seen some of that fatigue of, constantly having to be on one of those platforms. Certainly, you can't replace in-person meeting, shaking hands, interaction like that. Kind of what's your personal opinion / what you've seen on some of these services? How does that play out?
Technology, I think it's a critical factor, right? I think we all accept that. It was most often the number one factor when we were sort of doing research through the sort of 2020, 21, even through early 2022 in terms of, importance in terms of investment. And it still ranks up there, but it's falling down in terms of the priority, I think, schedule at the moment, just because the priorities are making the locations and the offices that people have as user-friendly as possible, making them as attractive as possible, making sure they're in the right location. That's the priority right now, rather than sort of the technology element. That's not to say technology disappeared, and I think it's a critical factor to understand usage, particularly. But I mean, at a personal level, I'm sort of disappointed that we haven't seen a huge step forward from some of the technology sort of platforms from what we had, in 2019. The products have evolved, but I wouldn't say I've seen like a game-changing leap forward in terms of usage or integration. Maybe that's, I understand stuff takes time to develop, so maybe that's still to come. But or maybe I'm missing something. I don't know, Jamie and Gio, if you're seeing, significant changes in how you're using things and the capabilities, or maybe we're just not advanced enough in our usage. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we're not quite there yet. I think we envision this sort of like, iPhone experience, like Apple, level of user experience, and everything being, the term frictionless comes up a lot, and Joe used that, term when we talked to him. So I think the vision is there, but it's not quite yet. And it's a good observation. I think probably it just takes time.
I mean, it's something the Instant Group, as the Instant Group as a wider company, we're working on, which is how do you, as a user of space, to Joe's point, frictionlessly interact and engage with that location wherever it may be. And I think that's definitely going to be part of the evolution of getting people back in and using space, which is making it easier. Whether that's your core office building, whether that's a co-working space, down the road, or whether that's logging in from your home computer and connecting with colleagues. It needs to be, I'm going to use Joe's phrase, frictionless.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part is how did this hybrid model play out, right? There's a lot of these conversations being had on multiple levels. I don't know, I'm a little old school, but I don't think you can replace in person, right? I'll tell you, I started traveling in the middle of COVID. After I got it and I knew how my body responded, I was like, you know what? I've got to go out and meet with people, have interactions, spend time building relationships. And I just see that hard to do over AI or, VR or different things like that. I just don't think you replace those things, right? It's hard for me to go through a Matterport and see a space without actually walking it, touching it, feeling it. You can't feel hospitality, right? Through technology, right? You have to have that interaction. So, I think I think that's going to be a big part. Is culture can't be cultivated over technology, right? And maybe I'll get proven wrong, right? And some kind of virtual reality comes out where you can have those things. But I know it's a major part of a lot of conversations being had. Or I mean, mid-COVID, I remember we would have these virtual happy hours, right? And I think actually Juicy still has them every Thursday or something like that. They've got virtual happy hours for their members. And so it's just hard to replace in-person water cooler type conversations.
Yeah, I mean, there was some great work done. I can't remember the company, to be fair, that this was, in 2016, but they were looking at interactions and kind of breaking down what do those office interactions look like, and where do they add value. And the ones that stood out for me, at least, were the ones where you as an individual are sat down at a desk focusing on something, and you catch someone's eye walking past, and you go, they would be really valuable at this point to input. Right, I'll grab them and call them in. You can't do that virtually, because you wouldn't have thought of that person without seeing them walk by, or see them earlier in the day. So there are, as you're right, you're spot on. Not all interactions can be replicated digitally or virtually. And that's why, in the UK, I think at the moment we're seeing a pretty big resurgence in sort of return to office. And as I mentioned, our office is at capacity 2 to 3 days a week, and still relatively busy on the Mondays as well. I won't comment on Fridays, but that hasn't changed. That's always been the case, I think, for across a lot of companies. So I don't know if it's the same in the US, but for me, I commute into London on a train. I can't get a seat a lot of days now. It feels as busy as it ever has been. Now the data doesn't quite tell the same story, but I'm starting to get those same feelings. So I don't think it'll be long until the utilization gets up to a pretty substantial level. That's not to say we won't see, as I say, companies still try and change because they understand that what they had before isn't suitable, I think, in most cases for the future. And flexibility and agility is needed, but utilization is starting to creep back up, I think, naturally, because, as you say, Gia, some of those interactions just can't be replaced.
And a lot of this, I mean, is going to play out depending on geography, right? I mean, I said that earlier, and I think that's going to be a big part. How hard is it to get to the urban core, right? The city center. How long does it take? What are headwinds there? But I mean, a great example that you just mentioned, I was just in New York and we were touring a space that a large landlord wants to figure out how to put flex in. So I had several operators come in and tour the space and have that kind of interaction. I mean, you got to touch it, feel it, see it again. And in between tours, I was asking one of our senior brokers in the AY office there, I said, so what do you see in the office? And we were having that conversation. He said, look, I'll give you an example. Last week, last minute call from a client of mine that had a need for a large block of space. And he said they wanted the information within 24 hours for us to make a presentation. He said, so I walked out in the hallway and I looked left, I looked right, and grabbed the next 2 junior brokers that walked by. And he said, when a couple of the other guys that were not in the office got wind of it, they said, well, why didn't you choose me? And he said, you weren't in the office. I grabbed the 2 closest associates to me. And I think that's a big part. You can't replace those things, right?
Well, I think that lines up a little bit with what James was saying about the pre-COVID research. It's like the eyeball thing and like the availability bias. It's like, look, you tend to, what's right in front of you is what matters.
Yeah, as you say, it's a bias. It's a natural bias.
Yeah,
you can't get away from it.
100%. Okay, can we wrap up with a couple of fun questions?
Ooh.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, James, what show are you binge watching right now?
Vikings. I don't know if you've got it. It's on Netflix.
So I don't watch a lot, but sometimes I'm like, I just need to get my brain like distracted. I'm binge watching Bridgerton.
Oh, okay. I'm yet to see it.
Yeah, I'm sure you will not. Okay, what's the best good book you've read recently?
Ooh. Now it's a bit old, and I'm sure many people have read it, but I missed it first time around, which is Freakonomics. The,
Totally.
the the first one, as I say, I
Yep.
think it's probably been out for 20 years or something. But yeah, I missed it first time round. But I love that sort of those sort of books with those sort of angles. And a friend said, "Oh, you haven't read that?"
Okay, if you're a podcast listener on the train, I've been in like, I used to listen to their podcast and I just went back to it and they have some really good episodes. So once you're done with the book, if you need a new podcast.
Perfect. I will.
Speaking
I'll
of
look for that on the way home.
podcasts, James, who are your favorite podcast co-hosts?
Oh, well, I don't know. I might have to go with Gio and Jamie based on this
Oh,
conversation.
that's great. That's great.
Plug
I'm
the
glad
channel. Plug the
you,
channel.
you dug deep for that one. So on the weekends when you're not working, what is your favorite thing to do? What's your favorite pastime?
Well, I live, as I say, outside London. I wouldn't say quite in the country, but sort of getting that way. So for me, it's a dog walk to a country pub in the lovely rainy British weather. Certainly at the moment. No, I love to get outside. So whether that's cycling or going for a walk with a dog, for me that's my happy place. I'd love to say skiing and sailing, but not the right time of year for that or the right place, unfortunately.
What kind of dog?
A lab. So yeah.
Good man. Black?
No, I don't know if you have them with fox
brown,
red or
yellow.
Fox red. We call them fox red in the UK. It's like it's ginger, basically.
Huh.
Yeah.
I've never seen a ginger lab.
I was about to say, I don't think we have those here.
Yeah.
You Google fox red lab, they're all the rage.
Huh.
All right. I've got a brown lab.
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. There you go.
And Jamie has some doodle like science experiment. So
I have two
free.
mini golden doodles. They don't shed. I was visiting my friends this weekend that have retrievers, and I was like, oh my God, I got hair all over me. Yeah. And so I like my hypoallergenic, non-shedding designer dogs.
I can see the benefit of that. I had kick dogs growing up, so I knew I was letting myself in for, but I did not remember the level of hair that is ever present everywhere.
Exactly.
But you wouldn't replace that for anything. That
God no. He's the only one that's happy when I come home. There you go. Yeah, see?
Oh, beautiful. Wait, what's his name?
Loki. Talking of Vikings.
Loki. Yeah. Nice.
Awesome. The god of mischief, which is quite apt actually. So yeah.
Well, this one's gonna throw Jamie off and throw you off too. So I am close to closing the deal to getting James on a webinar for GWA for early March. So stand by.
Awesome.
We haven't inked the paperwork, but we're really, really close.
See, I said James is an in-demand speaker, so I'm glad we lasted him in because he's got a lot of engagements.
I might even have the lights on that time, Gio. You never know.
Oh yes, we'll have slides and everything for that one.
Oh now you've put me right off.
No, we'll use the exact same slides that are already on the report, right? So then we're going to talk through them. You don't have to create new ones. I told you it was going to be easy, so I'm not trying to create more work.
You did. I'll hold you to that promise. No, that sounds good. Looking forward to that.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you for doing this today.
No, it's been great to chat.
Well, now that it's dark out, maybe you'll get a seat on the train home.
I hope so. Yeah, no, I should do it this time.
Good. Well, we'll look forward to the webinar in March. We'll talk to you soon.
Cheers, guys.